So, before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that this talk is being held on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded, it has and always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you. Okay, I will introduce myself and then introduce the old man by my side. So my name is Alex Hammer and I'll be your host for the evening. I'm a degenerate TikToker masquerading as a philosopher. That's like you're meant to laugh, but that's fine. No, seriously, I'm the child of migrants. My mum is like literally, less than meters away from me, which is just what someone wants when they're presenting. So now I'm the child of a Slav and an Arab, and this is at the center of my work, which takes many forms. I have a podcast where I interview people. This will be released in podcast form. I also teach a philosophy course, and a lot of the work I do centers around race, identity, colonization, and the effects of what happens when land is taken from people, depression, anxiety, trauma, and these kinds of things. And that's all you need to know about me. So, the person to my right is Justin Clemens. Big surprise. Justin, also in terms of level, can you all hear that? Okay? Yeah? Cool. Okay. Justin is an associate professor in literary studies in the School of Culture and Communication at the University of Melbourne. And I think this department changes its name every 15 minutes, so I probably referenced the wrong department.
It's okay, it gets better and better every game show.
I hope so. So Justin has written, extensively, as I said before, on many topics, from philosophy to psychoanalysis, from literature to art, from slavery to love. He's written about Freud, he's written about cocaine, he's written about Freud and cocaine at the same time. He's written about crime, he's written about power, control, contemporary poetry, video games, Assassin's Creed, mass media, avatars, cybernetics, and politics. So hopefully that was overwhelming. That's what was intended. Now, the last thing I'll say about Justin is probably one of the best descriptions I've ever heard about a human being before. And this was what someone said to describe Justin. And I, like a dream of mine is to be described this way. So if any of you have a platform and would like to describe someone, feel free to draw inspiration from this description to describe me. So here we go. This is a quote, and I quote verbatim, okay? So, Justin is a figure whose profound erudition, scabrous wit, immense charm, and devastating intellect cannot help but inspire narcissistic rage and jealousy that he should spend time with anyone other than oneself. So can we please all come together and welcome Justin Clemens. So that's quite an introduction. So we're going to begin today with a quote from a philosopher who Justin has spent a lot of time working on. This philosopher is still alive, remarkably. His name is Alain Badiou. He's a French philosopher who writes about many things. He's in the continental tradition in philosophy, which is meaningless, just like all other categories in philosophy. But we're going to begin with this quote, and I'm going to ask Justin to respond to it. This is a quote from Badiou. Since Plato, philosophy has stood for a rupture with opinion, and is meant to examine everything that is spontaneously considered as a normal. Everything consensual is suspicious as far as the philosopher is concerned.
Yeah.
What is Badiou talking about?
Yeah, I think he says Look, it's a pretty great quote. He's pretty explicit. He's extremely clear. It's one of the things I like about him. There's no prevarication or fucking about. It just lays it out. And he says, what is it about philosophy proper that we need to pay attention to? Is like all of us inherit an ancestral sort of disaster in some ways, and that not necessary, but just the structures where we inhabit. We haven't chosen them. We didn't often want them. They're often like oppressive or repressive, like extortion, alienating, and so forth. Right? But it's never very clear how to respond. How do you run? Won't do any good to just run. Can you hide? You can't hide from this. So how do you analyse? How do you speak back? How do you take apart the very thing that is both in you, in an intimate way, is formed you and forged you, and at the same time is also oppressive to you? And you need to find in philosophy is the discourse par excellence that takes that formation, which I think affects all of us, and says, like, let's say no to that, right? Let's not, we have to reject it. We can't simply, or if we're going to accept it, it can't just be accepted on its face value. It has to be, I guess, radically dismantled before we can remantle it again. So that's the thing I do like about Badiou. He is a self-professed communist as well, and he wants to say also that it's philosophy is essentially, despite, although it's obviously the thing about philosophy is no one agrees. That's another important thing about philosophy. No one agrees with each other. But the very lack of agreement with each other, the disagreement, the radical disagreement, has a revolutionary aspect. Like he likes to quote Chairman Mao, it's right to rebel against the reactionaries. So I guess that's my thumbnail response to
right. Okay, and you spoke about the importance of kind of reflecting on what's been received and trying to kind of begin anew, to rebuild something like this. Is this like an ideological rebirth? Is this like a structural, institutional rebirth? Is it all of these things?
Yeah, it's meant to be all of those things, because no matter what scale you look at, things always have to start with you at some point. And so, we can quote Paul Celan, like the great sort of, German language post-Holocaust poet of the 1950s and 60s in Germany. They moved to France, but obviously he nonetheless wrote in the language of the murderers, as he said, a world is rustling in scratched sheets, two fingers are snapping in the abyss, it all depends on you. So in the end, Badiou does quote this, it all depends on you. So it has to start with you, local, intimate, small, and you at odds with yourself, something that's uncertain or unsettled, that isn't simply able to be formed or captured in the terms that are already available to you. That's where philosophy has to begin. But it doesn't stop at that scale, because philosophy is always, even at least in Badiou's and other descriptions of it, it's always a social, political, even global assault as well, and it has to move from you through others. And it's not just, that's what stops it from just being narcissistic, because of course we're all narcissists, and that's fine too. We're good with our narcissism in our own way, and sometimes narcissism can look like self-questioning as well. But philosophy is different, because it takes that self-questioning and the narcissism and it starts to extend it, and it has to extend outwards to other people and in different ways, in unexpected ways, and the consequences of that then come back on you in ways that you didn't expect when you started that sort of like a process of questioning as well. So I guess that would be it starts personally, necessarily, but there's a kind of bit of depersonalization too, something uncertain in you, and then it continues that as it starts to articulate out. I guess the model for a lot of so-called Western philosophy, this is Socrates, right? Like there's a topic, I think that's the term, without place, that's literally, that's given to him by Plato, but also something atopic is also, it's a disease or a bit of an allergy or something. So philosophy is a kind of the allergy of the sissy itself, right? Like, it's made sick by its own routines but refuses to recognise it. But these symptoms, someone like Socrates then pop up who just talks to everyone. It's like a podcaster. Maybe you're our Socrates, Alex. Wow. Was that good enough? Was that we're on the way? Fantastic. We've got to be fucking like Alexander. Next thing you'll be killing the philosopher. No, he was the student of Aristotle, obviously, like Alexander the Great. And there's a great line by the Irish. Reactionary Irish poet, but a great poet nonetheless, W.B. Yeats, about sage Aristotle played the taws on the bottom of the King of Kings. How did Aristotle teach Alexander? By giving a few whacks. But it's true that when Alexander swept across all of Asia Minor, it sent information back to Aristotle. It kept not just because of Alexander, but there's a lot of connection which people also wanted to know between the East and the West of Indian philosophy, gymnosophy, as well as Greek philosophy, and a lot of what we'd like to call Western philosophy actually is it has its provenance elsewhere. And this is also something that we need to keep in mind, and also that we need to keep asking about the history of philosophy itself, the narcissistic bigging up that we like to give, it's ancient Greece, whatever. Yes and no. Mm-hmm. Other things. Anywhere.
Yeah, right. And so I guess I wanted to begin with that quote from Alain Badiou, because as far as I'm aware, he has been the person who's been, I guess, the philosopher who you have spent the most time working on. Yeah. And then I suppose, I tried to read part of his magnum opus, Being an Event.
Yeah.
But before reading it, I had listened to you speak about this book. When was it? Which year was it written?
It's 1988, and it comes out in French, Lettre de Venement, so it's been and it's translated, I think. My friend Oliver Felton translated. I think it doesn't come out to the early 2000s in English. It's maybe 2003, 2004 in English.
Okay. Yeah. So it's this gargantuan,
it's
epic
monster,
epic text. And before reading it, I fortunately had listened to Justin speak about this book, and he kind of warns you. He says that this is Justin. Justin, explains that this book being an event, the kind of Badiou's, central, most important piece, kind of acts as this nuclear bomb. It's this thing that isn't to be interfered with. It can't really be understood, can't be reckoned with. But you need to know that it's there in order to engage with, the work, his other work. So
it's Badiou's own metaphor in a sense. So probably no one's going to read my 3 really fat off books, but then they'll read the little ones, and if they disagree with the little ones, they have to know that I do have nuclear warheads too. So you've got to be a bit kind, where I might get a bit lax.
Right. So before we get into Badiou, before we get into nuclear war, I wanted to know what it was about, the academy, about the institution of university, about philosophy. What was it about these things that attracted you as a younger person and continues to attract you? Because, you're still going. You haven't, set fires at Arts West or whatever.
No. I mean, that just shows my spineless conservatism in a way, I think, Alex. And I did bump into, someone a long time later. I'd completely forgotten, and he said, "What are you doing?" I was like, I was teaching at Melbourne Uni. He was like, "Oh yeah, you always wanted to." You met me at a party in '88 or something. He said, "You always wanted to be an academic." I was like, "No fucking way!" Not only no memory of that, maybe, but I blame my mother, Alex, in this case. So it's my mother's. What did my mother want? Something smart. You want to be smart, So it's my mother. It's always scratch a little bit, and there's always a mother underneath. So I suspect that's the case, which is both. And so like every other tenured radical, as they say, I like the idea of these revolution, but really just like taking away, tat-tat. It's pathetic. I mean that a bit, but true. I really do mean that, and that is true. However, it's also true that one of the things about Badiou's work and the time and of its emergence and the way of its emergence, which is, we're in let's say, post, he adverts to this a lot because of the French May 68 and the uprising, the consequences thereof, right? And the consequences, as Chow used to say about the French Revolution, too soon to say. However, those consequences are both good and evil, beyond good and evil. So we're now in a neoliberal situation, which the university itself is the capture of the kind of neoliberal corporatism, right? It's no longer the university that I was still in the 80s when it was free. Can I just, like the word privilege I don't like because it doesn't, it's a way of both indicating something and then stopping a further analysis. I think in many uses the case, but there is still incredible privilege. When I was at university as an undergraduate, it was free thanks to the radicals of the 70s, right? And you would meet all sorts of people from all over the place who could do everything. It was a genuine opening, right? And I have to say that post-68 moment and the free education and tertiary education, you have no idea today of just, at the time, obviously, we complained about it and thought everything was shit, and it was too, and it deserved to be criticised. But at the same time now, thinking about the absolute not only loss of that, but the obliteration of the memory of that and the possibilities that it offered people, like in its own way in this country, which I'm a beneficiary of, right? But to be shut down in the way that it is, I find that I find it unbearable. And yet I'm still taking the way. So you've got to be a bit fucking, a bit careful. But it is unbearable. And I do think about this, as someone who is a teacher, and Friedrich Nietzsche has this line, and I've always rejected it and been a bit resistant to it. But it's true, I do like teaching, and it's in a kind of vampiric, parasitic way, because you just meet students who are amazing all the time, right? And they're amazing. I know that people here are fucking amazing, right? However, the point about teaching is to transmit something, and you can transmit, and it's not just this form of speech. To come back to the question you asked about structural change or the image that I gave of Socrates, is that how is it that I can continue to teach and people were, students are interested and the students are amazing, but will there be a place for them? What is the place of this? Even what you do, Alex, I see is a kind of both, on the one hand, excellence, and on the other hand, a symptom of give us all jobs at a university. They you don't have to be high paying, but they do have to be ongoing, continuing. If you want to have scholarship and study, but you also want something that's amazing for the society as a whole. And that's the point about the relationship between the personal and the political in the modality of philosophical revolution. That you have to be out of place in order to re-establish the place such that place is then more generous, open, supportive. Sorry, these are all a bit Pollyanna-ish things I'm saying, but I hope you get the picture. And it's one of the things today. I was going to finish the initial quote. He's a teacher. Only takes things seriously, even himself with respect to his students. So, I think I don't want to make that too, self-accurate, standardizing, sort of symptomatic slippages. But it does matter that you're not teaching yourself, you're not imposing. There's things that have to be transmitted, right? Like they have to be, right? Or if those things get shut down, they'll never be. Whole worlds will disappear, right? I'm sorry, since your mum's here, since you were talking about it, but she's a French teacher, right? There's some things you have to fucking do that are just to get to learn that language. They're not friendly, it's not easy, it's not always whatever. You have to my friend spent, like she said, a whole week in France trying to pronounce yogurt correctly. So you have to do terrible things to yourself too, but they're good things. They change the capacities for your action and future, right? That's I feel that's important.
Yeah, right. And one I wonder whether when you were at university, you felt as though the kind of central overarching theme of your education is that you're taught to know that you can't know what's coming.
Yeah.
And I feel like, despite philosophy, which was one of the things I've studied, despite that being, this kind of, very kind of rich and vast and complex discipline where you can study lots of things that don't seem to be related to the economy. Ultimately, when you study at university, you're not doing it vocation. You're not just there because it's, unless you're well established or something already. You don't go to university just for fun. And so I suppose one very upsetting thing about my experience of education was that it felt like the primary lesson, at least in the humanities, the kind of central thing that we were taught was to be as versatile as possible. And to accept that a clear and coherent life trajectory. You study philosophy, you become a philosopher at KPMG. Impossible. That doesn't exist. You study philosophy and then you go and do a law degree. And then, you're not so good at that. So you go into advertising and you're not so good at that. And then you're getting old and you're like, damn, what do I do? So do you I find this to be a very distressing thing. And I'm a student. As a teacher, do you feel affected by the way that the university kind of places an immense pressure on students to kind of accept that what they're learning is how to accept uncertainty rather than how to accept job security or something?
Yes, part of education, and I think state-based education, which has had both utopian and emancipatory aspects, as well as obviously alienating and control aspects, is and that's the shift that I myself have lived through, and some people I know, where we went from a situation where it was still disciplinary, where there was still the chance, particularly in working man's paradise Australia, and I say working man's paradise very advisedly and specifically, where you could tell your boss to fuck off and get another job, and the trade unions are very strong, etc., etc. And so I think I've moved from a time where you could live off the dole, or as my friends in the 80s called it, the Star Search allowance, right? You could have a nice house, you could live in Brunswick Street, you could get pissed every night and have a packet of smokes for $2, so it was great, right? And you could find a job, and if you didn't like a job, you could do another one, but there was a certain stability, openness, and a kind of political thinking to it, which is not the neoliberal world that the 21st century is. And I feel that I've lived through that shift in particular in a way where I was brought up to have those expectations for certain modern, I guess, colonial settler dominant expectations about the stability of a career and a job, to now being kind of not even a plenipotentiary, but a little kind of regional. My job is to teach you to have an interest in your own servitude as versatility. And the very things that you described about what I've taught and written about, they're not good things. Would I have done that if I hadn't been forced myself into a hyper-anxious anxiety about my job and my position? I've got to stay relevant. I've got to keep publishing. I've got to keep writing. And I have to say a certain diminution of focus and of capacity of myself, where you actually fuck yourself over a bit in order to stay current. But in staying current, then you're also transmitting the very worst thing that you yourself are fighting, or at least nominally fighting against. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's one of can young people not have a fucking life? Philosophy from Socrates is the corruption of the young, right? How do you corrupt it? The world's corrupt. So and Badiou himself has this formula. You've got to corrupt that corruption. So the corruption of pure versatility. Why not be versatile? It's like Marx says in the economic and philosophical manuscripts, it's the very famous statement, this about, your goat herding or cow herding in the morning, and then, literary criticism at night or something like that. You can be as versatile as you like. But it's under the conditions of unalienated labour that those choices should be possible, right? But it's not, we don't even have alienation in the old sense. Now we've got this scattering, this enforced, I think even versatility is not the right word, just a necessity of an openness to the shock doctrines of kind of global neoliberal capital run by, in the most, I think since the Neolithic period, I don't think there's been, like capital income inequalities since 12,000 BC. It's fucking incredible, right? The COVID plague, right? There's been an acceleration of just capital upwards, right? Like literally, literally we're being sucked dry by the vampires of capital, right? And of global capital, which have no longer any interest in supporting, building, establishing their the history of Australia, a horrific settler colony that starts as a penal colony and then establishes itself as a kind of incredible state, and I mean incredible in the sense of almost total state, hyper-bureaucratic, etc., has some possibilities, but it also is founded on something exceedingly sickening. But it's still building something. Well, we know today that all the wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, the ongoing war in Ukraine, but also Yemen and other places, Syria. It's a pure and simple destruction of policies, of social circumstances. Capital will now work by disordering societies, to suck it, to just crack the button and suck out it's not even building anymore. Right? I feel that's the horror of the situation that we're in, which I also think, and this is a properly philosophical thing, let's just try and describe, let's try and describe it properly, but that's never enough in itself, right? But let's at least give it a go, right? Things are fucking terrible. But you don't need me to tell you that they're fucking terrible. They're fucking terrible, right? And that's something else that Badiou actually said to me personally when he was out here maybe about 15 years ago. He was like, yes, but we all describe very well, right? We can all describe. What are you going to fucking do? I don't think he said fucking, but what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? The question is, it's the Leninist question. What is to be done? I think it's a question that affects all of us, but we're going to have to do it together. But how are we going to do it together when so much of contemporary capital is directed to smashing us apart, right? Really directed towards smashing us apart in really incredibly micro ways now. Like it's never been. I don't think capital's ever been so strong as it since the Neolithic. Neo-Neolithic. That's my slogan for where we are.
That's a pretty crushing summary of the world we're in just. But I'm not sure if anyone does disagree, maybe think of why you're disagreeing and ask it in question time. So if it's I agree with you. I'm not very hopeful about the condition of the world. And one thing that I was thinking a lot about last year was this thing that Judith Butler says, where Judith Butler is one of the world's foremost kind of critical cultural theorists, public intellectual, who's over in the States, in California somewhere. And she says that whenever people call to destroy a system and reduce it to nothing and rebuild again from scratch, that they don't understand how progress is made, because if you reduce everything to rubble, then all kinds of things can happen. Maybe, the Nietzschean will say history will repeat itself and we'll just rebuild the same structures again and again. Or, if we've destroyed all, the semi-legitimate institutions that we have, like, if we storm Parliament House in Canberra,
it's a Capitol building in the United States.
Yeah,
they did that.
Yeah.
Stole some office furniture.
Yeah. But if there ever is a successful kind of overthrowing of legitimate institutions, it's hard to see how. It's hard to see what will come next. Positively, what will come next.
Absolutely.
I suppose if you, as you said, we are so deeply fucked. How, I guess this is a question that people are asked again and again and again. What next? What next? As you said, this is what Lenin talks about. But
But he had a plan. Let's be honest. And
Okay.
he thought about that plan, and he fulfilled that plan. And part of the 20th century, we're still in the aftermath of what Lenin's answer to what is to be done. Again, for better or for worse. But there was an organisation, there was a party structure, there was an ongoing. There was living in exile. There was several failed revolutions, and then there was the October Revolution in 1917. So it took a long time. And then there's he danced in the snow like Lenin, and when he realised it had lasted, his revolution had lasted longer than the Paris Commune, which of course ended very badly, and maybe the Soviet Union did too. But that sort of plan, do we have the equivalent of organisations like that? I mean, what Badiou himself says, and I think the problem is I'm just really parroting Badiou, and so you should go and read Badiou or watch it because he's much. And then he just says it better.
So
you're stuck with me.
Give yourself the most profound migraine.
Oh my God.
Possible.
Well, he does say this, which is you've got to be as optimist as a philosopher. Now that's not because you feel optimistic or because you think you can see a future, but otherwise don't bother fucking speaking. Otherwise you're just another pessimist like everyone else. You look at the world and think, well, there's nothing to be done. All right, that's it. I'm giving up. Right? That is not the. But so you have to be an optimist out of conceptual discipline and rigour, going, if I'm going to bother speaking, it's not even just about hope. I'm not dead yet, what am I going to do? What can we do? How do we go? And you can ask yourself, and you can make all sorts of, you can go wrong in so many different ways. But the attempt to do something is still an experiment with your life and for the better of yourself and for others as well. And that's why it has to be organised, and it has to be emancipatory, to come back to the very quote with which you began. If it's not emancipatory, well, we can just keep on going with the same old shit all of the fucking time. Fine, it will just run by itself, right? It will exacerbate by itself. So how are you going to fight against it? You're probably not going to win, right? But what's the winning or losing is itself. Those terms are given to you by your enemies. Philosophy always takes place. It's born in a world of enemies, right? Which is always why you fight. The philosophy is a polemos or a war or a struggle or a fight or however you want to put it, because you're always fighting against what is the establishment of iniquity and corruption, right? And you're not going. I mean, you've been doing it for years. Has anything got there? So what? That's not enough, but you have to have a discipline, an intellectual discipline of optimism, I think he says, right? So try it and see, right? Fail, or as he also likes the Samuel Becker quote, fail, try again, fail better, etc. Yeah.
Do you feel like you've retained that optimism? Because, when you were talking about your work, it sounded like, and I think many of the your colleagues at the University of Melbourne have said something similar to me, their lives have become this kind of constant state of fear.
They're at the door, they're after us. Good. Well, good. The ghost of,
Gwen Davis is the I don't even know.
Well, he's now back in, he was. He's now back in the Labour, He's now back with Labour in the cabinet.
Oh, what's the new guy's thing? Okay, yeah, whatever.
You can look him up. He's a lovely guy.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We're all lovely guys, Alex.
Yeah. No, but you were saying that, like, and, you know, many of your colleagues have said that life as an academic has become this, like, systematized, like, robotic, hyper-bureaucratic,
hyper-surveilled, all true.
And, like, how the hell are you supposed to remain optimistic if you're given such...
Because of students, because it's still not dead. We're not dead, and I had to come back to what I said. Everything's been bled out of the system, whether the job as an academic or any corporation you work for. The structures are almost the same. There's parasitic, they squirt into every different little system, and they squirt in this kind of viral agent, and then it just replicates. And what does it replicate? We have one aim: profitability at all costs, right? But no institution can work just by profitability, right? They have to be, and this may be where we could come to psychoanalysis, everything has to be split. You have to have an economics, whether it's Marx or Freudian economics or what, there's production to be done and reproduction to be done, right? And the ways in which different societies do that is kind of hilarious and whatever, and we should always sort of change that. However, there's always something more, right? But I don't believe that in the neoliberal capital thinks that there's anything more than profitability at all. However, it's not dead because when I meet these students who are so fucking amazing, really just, that's the thing I just think about. I mean, how have I had the luck to be in this position to meet so many great, very diverse people, because they still want something, and it's a bit inchoate, but they want something more than what exists as well. So I would never say give up on that. And if you want a slightly more depressing image, which was I think the last interview with a sort of Jewish English psychoanalyst called Hannah Segal, who this interview's in the Guardian from about maybe 2008, 2009. You could find it pretty easily. But it's got a great photo of her. She's in her 90s. She's dressed in this really snappy suit. She looks incredible, right? Like, and the interviewer's like, how are you going, Hannah? And she's like, I'm in my 90s. How the fuck do you think I feel? And she says, my body's like a psychotic baby. Nothing makes it happy. And I was like, you were fucking excellent. And then the interviewer's a bit overwhelmed. It's like, what are you going on? What are you? And she goes, have you seen that? Have you read The Road or seen the film The Road? The Cormac McCarthy thing, which is you're in a world of fucking organised cannibal gangs whose job is just to eat you, right? And the two options are either the two options are either you've got to just keep fleeing in a terrible, awful way, or hang yourself, commit suicide. And they're the two options for normal people, psychopathic, like cannibalistic killers, right? And Williams was just like, and she's like, yeah, the job is just to go on. Just go on. That's your only ethical job in that position, is not commit suicide and not become a cannibal. Like, how you do that, that's your problem, right? But your job is to keep going, right? Again, another Beckettian thing, really. Like, I can't go on, I'll go on, right? So I feel there's a message of hope.
Thank you, Justin. I feel great. So you that message from the psychoanalyst whose name I forgot. Hannah Segal. It sounds like something. It sounds like there is nihilism, and then there is optimism, and there is camaraderie, and there is misery, all in one.
Yeah.
And I know you've written about nihilism in the past. So I suppose how does this quote from Hannah Segal, how do you feel about it today? Do you think that because it sounds like what she's saying is that fundamentally we don't have a choice. Like, we just have to go on.
Well, you
Otherwise,
have a choice. You can die,
oh
right?
yeah,
And and that is real nihilism, or being a part of a cannibal organisation and nothing else. That seems nihilistic as well. But you don't know what At some point, you don't even have to know, and this is where philosophy has to touch on. You alluded it to before. Philosophy isn't about knowing everything, right? Or at least I don't think it is, although there's some versions of philosophy that offer solutions and responses and can help you. But philosophy isn't, and I think philosophy generally isn't about that. It's about saying you may not even know what it is that you're doing or why you're going on, but someone like I guess the Algerian. Who wrote the book about the plague? Why am I Camus? Because he says suicide is the only serious philosophical question. Why? If you look around, give up now. It's fucking awful, right? It's why would you? And as he ends that book, the Myth of Sisyphus, one must imagine Sisyphus happy, as you know, which is what you're just doing is absolutely empty, stupid punishment forever, right? Well, sure. So well, at least you're doing something. At least your hands. The devil finds work for idle hands to further out. No, the point is just as you're going, new things will emerge, right? Things you haven't thought of before. Things maybe encounters you've never had before. Like on Bridge in Paris, Alex, as you're sorry if I don't mind me invoking something that we were speaking about before. You never know, right? And then your life and someone else's life, and then an entire incredible set of consequences, none of which you could have imagined, emerge from you continuing to go, right? So that's why but an idea has to be, and this is the other thing, is that even though you may not know, you can still have an idea, even though that idea isn't something that you know, right? So the separation of knowing and ideas, of simple having a plan which you then implement, we know what planning is, the logistics of planetary, of planetary expropriation and so on. They're incredibly well planned, right? These aren't very well planned, your life isn't very well planned, but there's some ideas you have. They don't have to agree with anyone else's ideas, but are they keeping you going? Yes. Are they in excess of what exists? Yes. Are some of them narcissistic screens? Yes. So fucking what? Right? It's not done that way. Yeah, that's the. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it did. Yeah. It did. It got me thinking about I guess either where you look for inspiration to kind of continue on this eternal quest of uncertainty. And I know that you're a poet, you write poetry, you talk about poetry, you write things, you like art, you like reading,
it's not so bad.
But what, I guess maybe we'll start with art, because I know that there are many creative people in the audience today. What is it about art that, I guess, why is it important for you? What does it give to you? Does it allow you to, it reveals something to you, so you're able to continue going on? It, produces new thinking in your mind or something?
I think all of those things, and the thing about art, which is amazing and which is kind of weirdly universal, and this is something I do like about Badiou, despite everyone, like a lot of criticism of ideas of universality as if they were inherently imperialist or colonialist, which isn't the case. But that suture is very important, because when you're thinking about things, you can also start to reject the things that might help you because they've been associated really with the things that you definitely need to. And the universalism doesn't have to be stupid universalism or fault. It can be a kind of, and one of them is that all over the world, there's always, it turns out, everyone there is art and there's poetry and there's these forms of speaking and they're all quite different. But we know that they all do something, and they have a kind of weird power of captivation, which you don't really know why. Why is that? And you can't not ask those questions. I was like, why am I looking at this? Is this anything? Or actually, this is a real thing. Or but it doesn't look like anything. Or no, this is really derivative. And then you can see already. You can start getting like from a tiny little thing. You can start generating a whole series of anxieties and complaints and captivations that are not necessarily clear or straightforward or whatever. And I think that art definitely has, that's one of the things it does. It's also a function. It has a teacher. It has a pedagogical function. Like Homer, you teach the kids about your ancestors or your fake ancestors and the gods and how you row a boat and best way to run a slave society or whatever, right? But it also has some other things that go, this heady mix of something like, it's something that's a bit deranging, but very small and really, really importantly to me, and I think this is that you can experience the violence of art, but if at any point you are violently expected to like it, to really affirm it, then it's no longer art. It actually disappears. If there's a social command to like the art as such in it disappears immediately because of the threat of violence. The thing about art is the kind of violence of the idea, or the violence of the image, or the violence of sound, which affects you in a way that's both violent and anti-violent. But if you're forced to like it, then you're fucked, right? So I like poetry. I have two daughters. The older one wouldn't go to sleep for a long time unless I sang her songs. I have a terrible singing voice. I don't know any songs. I do know lots of poems off by heart. So I'd sing her poems off by heart, and that worked out perfectly well. Still can't remember a single fucking one of them. Thousands of times I've sung those terrible fucking answers. But she went. So my poetry singing, that was what it put her to sleep. So art is also a way of putting the kids to sleep. But I was also telling you this before about my younger daughter, who it's like, you're boring me to death, Dad, you're going to kill me, please don't say another word, no poetry, I hate it, I hate you, right? And that's another way of, your dad, they're born, for me, the poetry's great. My older daughter, it put her to sleep, and that was a good thing. The younger daughter hates it because she's been born into a situation which is actually for her slightly oppressive. What for me is exciting and like William Blake, don't you know, Tiger, burning bright. You can hear it's what a disaster, right? Even my partner's like, your voice is terrible. It's terrible. But for the younger daughter, it's actually an oppressive situation of horror to have this being, some adult old man giving this stuff. So art itself is quite, it's quite volatile and it's quite fragile, and it doesn't work in any straightforward modalities of transmission, right? I'm the canon for my daughter, right, or the younger daughter at least, and she's like, no, that's not what I like, right? What she likes is, unfortunately, it's kind of like Barbie on some program at some point, but I've got no say over that, right? That's for her to decide. But whatever art will affect her, if art does affect her, it will be of an entirely other order than what I'm telling you about what I liked about this sort of art. But that's part of art in a way that isn't part of canonical institutional forms of transmission.
I might ask one more question, and then perhaps we'll open up to the audience for questions if you have any. So, in what you were saying just before, Justin, you kind of stressed the importance of art not being something that is, totalitarian.
Yeah,
it must be
absolutely.
Kind of, you must be free to interpret it and receive it however you like.
Although you never are as well, which is the other thing I'm saying. So it also breaks through that. It both supports it and breaks through it as well. It's kind of crazy, right? Since Mairead's here, I know like she loves Hitchcock and knows everything there is to know about Hitchcock, and it's amazing. But when I look at Hitchcock, I'm just like, yeah, they're really good, right? But Ray can actually see something in the Hitchcock and then go, look at that movement, look at that shot, reverse shot, like some of it, and it's like, holy shit, we've just blown apart something for me which I must have seen. It went before my eyes. We all saw it, right? But I had no idea what was going on, and I took no notice of it, right? And that's the other thing that, like, sometimes art can induce you to literally seeing things that are there that you can't see, right? Is another, formula. Even when it's transmitted in the most massive institutional form, and sometimes it's transmitted in a massive institutional form to stop you from fucking seeing it by forcing you to see it, for instance. It's another kind of paradox of art, I think.
Yeah, wow. That's really interesting. I guess, like, this, I know that Badiou talks about the master and the teacher.
Yeah.
And it almost sounds like when you are, that it almost sounds like my generation only has teachers, in the sense that we are just, like, given things, and we're not supposed, where, as you said before about art that is kind of liberally displayed to, a group of people so that they're not supposed to see what's actually happening. I feel like that's what's happened most of my life with my education. Just been, like, thrown things, and I just, like, accept them and regurgitate them. I don't even know what I'm saying.
Yeah. And the essence of education, as my friend Alain Badiou says, what is an education by truths? That is what you just described as what he thinks of as the standard form of education everywhere. Where, in its own way, and how, even though it seems very different in different parts of the world or in different epochs or something, the essence is to make you go to sleep by forcing a kind of certain forms of regurgitation while things are done to you, that you also can't think because of the very modality of the transmission itself. So how do you break that apart? That's a different question for different generations. It's the same problem for Adam, like always, but the actual means and the methods, the techniques, the technologies are different, and every generation is fucked because not only have your parents failed, basically, I don't mean that we haven't failed at all, but I'm just saying we old people have, like, really failed in a really terrible, all you can see is a fucking wreckage of a failure. You're going to have to do something else, right? And there's nothing in the world that enables you, that is saying, hi, this is the way, or as I think it's Brunovsky says in his insane Holocaust memoir, this way to the gas, ladies and gentlemen, right? Like, so he ended up, he was actually a classical scholar who ended up in the camps, and he said it was only then that he realised, he goes, all of the Plato, Aristotle, all the classical learning he loved, he said, they're also slave societies, and for the first time I realised that's what it was. It was like being in a concentration camp as a slave in these societies, and I can no longer affirm all of that I've affirmed before as a result of that experience and that recognition. So you know what I'm saying too. So it's not a light situation.
Yeah. Wow. So I guess, like, you said that the task, the onus is on future generations.
Well, it's on all of us to continue.
Yeah.
But you've got to do it as well. And you can't simply listen to what you're given, because that's part of the problem itself, right?
Yeah.
You know that's the problem of education. And the problem of education, me as an educator, is I'm doing the very thing that I purport to be saying the opposite of, right? So, and that structural hypocrisy is part of my job. My job is to be a structural hypocrite. And, it's not that, I've got some money, right? They're paying me every 2 weeks. That's great. Don't get me wrong. Don't put me out of the Roman Empire. However, like, structural hypocrisy is also a thing, that I do also do, right?
Well, I think I've taken up, for nearly an hour's worth of your time. And your time too, which is valuable.
Your own time. Think of all the things you could have been doing. Exactly. To sleep, perchance to dream.
I know. Dream of a better world.
I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself a king of infinite space.
Well,
not that I had bad dreams. Go on.
Well, before we move on to questions, can we all please thank Justin? Yeah, of course.
So can I get a beer, if that's okay?
So yeah, I guess while Justin, before Justin...
Yeah, like completely writes himself off.
Yeah, while we have
a small window.
We'll have to do pass the parcel.
Yeah.
This is going to be a heavily contaminated...
Yeah. It's an epidemiological bomb. Don't touch, just,
So yeah, I guess we'll open up to questions for the next 15 minutes or so. Do you have a question here?
Oh yeah, my phone's about to die, and I was kind of just taking notes, so I'm just gonna maybe just spew it all out at once. So I was interested you were talking about kind of philosophy. You have to start with yourself, like it's a kind of personal project. And I guess speaking for yourself, I'm wondering if at any point it can offer some sort of and you were saying how it starts like there's something really disquieting, there's something incongruent inside of you, like there's something that doesn't match, like what is this? Why do I feel hysteric? Like what is this in the atmosphere? I'm wondering if it can ever lead to some sort of like catharsis or consolation, or if constantly it's this perpetual cycle of self-overcoming, and moreover, if that's even possible for yourself personally, or if you need the friend who comes in between I and myself or something, you need a friend to have this to stimulate this never-ending cycle of overcoming. And if there's no consolation, there's only it's only satiety is death. It's like oh shit, I don't feel fucked up anymore. Why do I need to keep driving?
Absolutely.
Like everything is good.
Great question.
And so what I'm interested in is if there's actually something really vital about feeling slightly pathologized, and that it's really something like motivating. And when you're healed, you're also dead, because you can't keep going on like that. I guess.
Count no man happy till he's dead, for instance. And, best never to have been born. Second best to die soon, as ancient Greek tragic wisdom or something like that. So yes, really good question, and really, I think it really puts the problem of why bother doing this at all if all you're going to get is more disquietude from it, right? Is disquietude then just a motor, a self-feeding motor, a self-fueling motor, which then comes up with its own moral judgments as well. Like the way, in fact, you described it was exactly how I think Freud describes, as a redescription of what I was saying, the superego itself, i.e., an eternal, allegedly moral agency. It's the voice in your head just constantly screaming at you, do this, do it again, do it better, you fucking piece of shit, why are you such a fucking piece of shit, blah, blah. Now that is a real problem, is that agency, we should never, Freud says it's like a blackmailer, the more you give it, the more it takes, right? And that's also part of the Freudian irritation with philosophy, because Freud wants to say you've just taken over this stupid moral parasite within you, and you're doing its will as if that actually led to anything better, right? So that problem is a real problem. And sorry, once again, I'm giving you the gospel of Badiou, so wash my mouth out with beer or something at some point, although he doesn't drink himself, very interesting reason. However, he says, no, you have to have anxiety, but you also have to have commitment. There will be anxiety, but it doesn't depend on you, right? But as you work through the anxiety, there is a kind of a courage that comes with it, where you can start to do things that aren't things that you've done before and are surprising to you, and transform your life and the life of others. And that's an external thing. No matter what this voice is going, actually it starts to matter differently and change itself. The very relation between ends and means starts to shift as you work through it. And then you can end up with something like an affective justice, for instance. The most ancient, in Theodore Adorno and Minima Moralia, says, this book comes from the most disastrous situation. But I want to write a book which goes back to the most ancient philosophical problem of what is a good life? How should I lead my life? And how should I do it? That's an open question still. So yes, there has to be anxiety and disquietude, but it's not the outcome or the goal or the only motor or the thing. It's actually much more complex than that. New things will emerge, including new feelings of passion, but also like joyful passion, I guess, as Spinoza would say, or new forms of active quietude, of self-transformation as well. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Thank you. Thanks, Clemens.
I actually have a follow-up question. I guess I was thinking, if it starts with you and if it's something personal, if the philosophical project is ultimately about justice or something, as you say, and if really you should care about other people being able to follow you on your own private little fantasy adventure, like if you can feel...
That's just narcissism, and I would say it does begin with you, but it might be intimately personal, but it's also completely impersonal. I mean, there's different vocabularies for that. I mean, I quite like that. I mean, I really like the Jacques Lacan's version, which is an extimity. It's what's in you more than yourself. You actually misidentify yourself with it, but it's actually an external, again, horrific parasitic agency driver, But it's both personal and impersonal. If it just becomes narcissism, then you become a cult leader. But philosophy can also look like cults, as can psychoanalysis. In fact, if you look around you, most of our lives are driven. My fucking family's a cult. Right? I don't want to be in it. Neither does anyone else in my family. However, here are a cult, and I don't know what to do about it. But you've got to bring them up something right. But it's not just the cult. To come back to Alex's question about and the distinction that Badiou makes between masters and just teachers. Where as a teacher, what he means by master is a master detached from any servitude whatsoever. And what does that mean? It means when you encounter philosophy, like, yes, the disquietude in your person, the narcissistic disorder and so on, the symptomatic splitting, there's also something else that isn't just reducible to an individual psychopathology. And how do you follow that? And it's a very difficult question, but at least in principle, you can see there is something there that's more than us and more than just a psychopathology. Yeah.
So because it's not reducible, then it's shareable and worth sharing.
It is, absolutely. It's not reducible. And what is it? Like, we don't know. It'll be found out by as you do it. You'll find out. And you might have to affirm the consequences, which may not be the ones that you thought you were signing up to. This is why love is one of the events for Badiou. It's like, there you go. They look pretty good. Like, it seems good. I'll try this. Next thing you know, as Hegel says, the babies come, the usual headaches, the wife looks like everyone else, like, the angel, yeah, sure, that's one outcome, right? But off you go. Or as Lacan says, off you go, it'll be marvellous.
Any other? Oh, Rose.
Hi, I just have a question. Maybe dovetailing off that slightly, but also about where you ended with structural hypocrisy and ideas of that. And I'm quite interested in the tension between artistic labour and, I suppose, as you say, the neoliberal kind of scenario that we're in. Mm. And artists kind of, the way that we inevitably parrot or inhabit the same kind of economic structures that neoliberal, like it used to be kind of like a radical act to not be part of a kind of 9 to 5, even like a unionised system of labour. Yeah. We were kind of alienated in that way, but as a kind of productive force of work. Yeah. But now capitalism has kind of eaten into that, and that's become the dominant mode of production. Absolutely. So I'm kind of interested in what you think when saying like just keep going. When your version of just keep going is to just kind of then take on the negative power structures that you're implicated in?
Really great question. And it does sort of dovetail with the question before. It's about a question of, is there something irreducible that isn't just neoliberal capital? And if so, what is it? How could we find it? What will it look like? And it's extremely, I guess, interesting but tense, right? There has to be, or as Badiou says elsewhere, a fixed point, a point of interruption. And so it has to both interrupt neoliberalism, but then it has to be a fixed point for you to keep going, even as you're being exploited by the labour. And one of the paradoxes, and I think you've alluded to this, of contemporary artistic labour, on the one hand, artists make no money, completely hyper-exploited, do a whole series of unbelievable amounts for free, and exactly, neoliberalism has learned something from art. It's like, we can get all of these people to work for free if we make it about creativity and about their freedom and their versatility and their flexibility. In fact, neoliberal capitalism has learned a great deal from the labour of artists, and it parasites off it, and it copies it, and then it feeds it back to you. And one of the things that Jacques Lacan, the French psychoanalyst, really hated about philosophy was exactly this structure, where he said, when you look at Socrates, he talks to everyone in the situation, and that looks egalitarian and emancipatory. He even talks to slave boys, right? But if you look at the structure of it, for Lacan as a psychoanalyst, he says, what does philosophy do? It asks you all these questions. Hey, Alex, how are you? It pulls out, it looks like it's talking to you, it pulls out your knowledge out of you, and it goes, thank you. It takes it, formalises it for the masters, for the real economic masters, the slave masters, and then it shoves it back into your body again, going, hey, how do you like, them apples? So in fact, artists are now contemporarily in the most paradoxical and weird position, where neoliberal capital is in fact art capital. It's learnt everything that it could from artists, and now is pushing back everything it stole from artists back into their bodies. So you're getting your own message back to you in an inverted, expropriated, and doubly damaging form. Right? Does that make now? I think that's why art now is remains one of the most volatile areas. Right? Because how far has neoliberal capital gone with that? I think there is something non-reducible about art, but it's not going to be recognisable under those circumstances. It's got to be actually unrecognisable, and why it's not an identity. It's that at the end, it's something which can't be predicated. You're like, what the fuck is that? Right? And maybe in the end, it'll turn out just to be another ruse of neoliberalism. Who knows? But you don't know yet. If you did know, then you'd definitely be fucked. Right? So as long as we don't know, that's the paradox of philosophy. Sometimes philosophy has to say, if you can know, then you can't know it because it's already dead and done and dusted. If you're not really sure, but you think it might be neoliberalism, well, it might be, but if you really can't be 100% sure, then that's worth pursuing, right? But then you might have to make some changes that you didn't expect as well, and some structural compromises. And in fact, we're all fucking hypocrites, right? Like, in some way. It may not be the worst thing in the world. Being a kind of apex, predator like Elon Musk, I think, that's a different matter. I mean, where does that money come from? Right.
Thank you.
You say so. Thank you. It's been really great talking to you.
More alive, maybe. Okay. Yep. Yeah, please.
And also, I try not to give it too much preamble, but there's been mention of, the important question of suicide and then the question of going on. I wanted to ask Justin, not necessarily with the desire to provoke him, but can a philosopher live too long? Like, so to the point where you go, oh, I like his early stuff.
Yes. I at one stage I kept wishing Badiou would die, because every time he writes something new, it falsifies everything that I've been saying about it up to now, and I look more and more foolish, even though I'm meant to be the expert. So yes, the very fact that Badiou is still alive, it's like it's been an outrage to me for 40 years. Like, you know that, however, I am glad you answered this, you know that Kant wanted to get to 80 because Plato, to reach the age of Plato, but it was clear, his birthday is the 22nd of April, but it was clear in February of the year that he died to his friends, right, that he's probably not going to make it. So, and by that stage he was so kind of like, he had lived too long and had sort of degenerative sort of brain problems. So they lied to him that it was his birthday and had a party, and he died happy when he reached 80, even though he hasn't. And even though in Kant's moral philosophy, the one thing you must never lie under any circumstances. So I would say, yes, Immanuel Kant lived too long and not long enough at the same time. And that's the essence of philosophy. You live too long and not long enough, and that's it. That's it. Yeah.
Well, can we please all thank Justin?